Okay, I hope it's working. Let me just rephrase the motion so everyone can know. The motion reads, this House regrets the dominance of prosperity gospels in South Korea. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to the podium. Hear, hear.
Right, am I audible? Okay. Right, I will start my speech. I would prefer to take POIs by chat. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Right, this House, first of all, recognizes the problem as this House would first of all like to recognize the problem of the Protestant Church in South Korea as having a justification for immoral acquisition of wealth, and this House would like to prove in this speech why the dominance of prosperity gospels in the South Korean Protestant Church is detrimental to all stakeholders involved. And I would first like to look into the problem that we have first identified. So the first problem that we identify with the dominance of prosperity gospels in South Korea is that it justifies any immoral acquisition of wealth based on a religious justification provided by this prosperity gospel. And this is because any acquisition of wealth under this religious model is looked upon as the will of God that is justly given to them as a sorry, as a kind of reward for the religious acts that they have done. And the problem that arises here, the main cause of the problem is that there is an imbalance between vague and arbitrary standards for what they must do to acquire such a religious blessing, and a relatively certain and apparent standards for the material benefits that they will receive. And what do I mean by vague and arbitrary standards for what they must do? So even if the Bible says something, even if the Bible says that you must donate to help others, and you must act in accordance with the will of God, and so forth. Even if the Bible states the things that they must do, realistically speaking, in the modern world, it is impossible for individuals to abide by that entirely. And then what happens? Then individuals start to interpret the Bible according to their own standards, according to their own moral beliefs, or the moral beliefs that is provided for them by the church that they attend to, and start interpreting things that in ways that allow them to engage in such actions in a more easily accessible behavior. Yes, I will take the POI from CO.
Right. Oftentimes, religion it says that because this is word of God, even if you don't consent, you should follow. Why is it that individuals get to arbitrarily decide word of God on their side?
That is this arises because of the characteristic of the Protestant Church compared to the Catholic Church. The characteristic of the Protestant Church is that there is no single unified entity that decides upon the interpretations of the Bible, and with the assumption that we have made that it is impossible for individuals to act strictly according to every rule that is provided by the Bible because of the complications of the modern society, because of the more complex policies and the rules that are existent in the 21st century compared to that of the time period when the Bible was written, because we are assuming that impossibility of abiding by everything strictly, that leads to the need for individuals to start interpreting things and start selectively choosing the ones that are more important to follow and start drawing priorities. That's when individual interpretations and that's when the room for interpretation starts getting in the way. And what does the Catholic Church do? The Catholic Church has a single unified entity in the Vatican that does the interpretation for all of its followers. But in contrast to that, the Protestant Church, the concept of the Protestant Church itself is a very vague term that rules out the Catholic Church and refers to basically all most other groups of the Christian Church, and that itself leaves a lot of room for different interpretations to take place, and that is and when individual followers of the Christian Church, of the Protestant Church, attempts to draw priorities between what they must follow, what they can actually do in life to follow the Bible, they will try to do what is more easily accessible, and they can consider options from two major categories: A, giving charities with religious purposes, or B, doing volunteer activities in the name of God. And what is more easily accessible for people living throughout the modern society is the first option, giving charity. You simply have to give money to a donation and you are done and over with. That is why they will choose to most individuals will rather choose to donate money in the name of God to a religious group, to a religious organization, or a church that they believe in. And this is when problems start to occur, because individuals start to believe that they are basically free to go once they start donating. They they will start to engage in immoral activities that will in most cases be for the purpose of gaining gaining wealth. And while there can be moral ways of acquiring wealth, the problem is that even if money is earned in an immoral way, this easily accessible act of giving charity in the name of God will provide justification for that individual to not feel any guilt when they acquire those immoral forms of wealth. And these characteristics of many individuals is that they seek religious justification for their actions. And this entire mechanization is far worsened by a confirmation bias that exists when they engage in immoral action and justify themselves based upon looking back on the actions that they did in the name of God, and saying to themselves, this is all right because I acted in the name of God. This is the will of God. And this itself is far worsened off by the rigid hierarchical structure of many religious societies in South Korea. And this is harmful for all stakeholders involved, not just to those existing followers of religions, but also to potential new followers of religion who will be burdened, who will feel that psychological pressure when they newly enter a church and witness that the rigid hierarchical structure pressures them to donate charity, to give to donate money to that church, and that atmosphere that exists will have them to believe that if they do not do that, they are not a good follower of that religion, and that they will not gain material wealth in the future. And a further harm that I would like to mention is that it provides justification for having poor people left out in the society, because according to this logic of the prosperity gospel, those poor people are poor for a reason, and that is because they didn't engage in a way favorable to a certain religion, and that will further harm all other stakeholders involved. And that is why I'm very proud to propose. Thank you.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 16 seconds. Thank you for your speech. Now I'd like to welcome the Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
All right, Madam Speaker, I think that basically the previous speaker, the Prime Minister's speech was full of assumptions. So basically they assume that people are committing these immoral, illegal activities or stacking of money through illegal means or immoral means in the first place. And they try to assume that basically they're justifying these kinds of immoral things and moral actions in the individual level using the notion of theology that we are talking about in today's debate. We don't think that is actually the case, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, because in the reality, people basically these kinds of assumptions are not enough proven by side proposition in the first place. And moreover, this theology that we're talking about today, prosperity theology that we're talking about today, does not work in the reality that way, because we believe that it actually cancels off the negative influences, the possibly true negative influences that they're talking about in today's debate, and it works in a more positive way in the reality. So as the Leader of Opposition from opening government, I'd like to be delivering to you two substantive arguments right side. First of all, about the positive aspects of how this theology, how this prosperity theology works in the reality. Second of all, I'm also going to talk about how this cancels off the negative aspects of capitalism. But before I move on to the substantive arguments, I'll briefly rebut the argument that was coming from the Prime Minister's speech. What we heard from the Prime Minister was basically people are committing immoral activities, and because people are arbitrarily interpreting the Bible in the first place, these kinds of actions are justifiable. We tell you two things. First of all, we question what actually, what specific immoral activities they are talking about today, because we don't really hear we don't really hear a clear explanation as to what that kind of moral activity is in the first place. So what basically people might be illegally stacking up money, but basically we ask you what actually is the cause of it, because we don't think that the prosperity theology is the direct cause of it. It might be a part of people committing actions, but actually it's not really the root cause of people committing those kinds of possible immoral activities, because we believe that people's way of individually people like stacking of money in immoral ways, it's basically an individual problem. For example, like people might be not following the law, people might be like following immoral or like illegal in the first way, illegal actions in the process of stacking of money. So if basically people don't break the law, people like basically don't exploit other people in the process of stacking of money, we don't think that that kind of thing is really prevalent in the society in the first place. And moreover, like those people are the ones who are included in the minority. So we don't really think that the prosperity theology in and of itself isn't actually a direct cause of those immoral, like intuitively immoral kind of actions that people are committing, that have been assumed by side proposition. The second one, Madam Speaker, bring that basically prosperity theology functions in a positive way in the reality, to like cancel off the like possible negative influences that they talked about in today's debate. That is also going to be delivered in my second argument. So I'll just move on to the substantive arguments. So moving on to the substantive arguments, Madam Speaker. First of all, about the positive aspects of how the prosperity theology is going to function in the reality. So in that, Madam Speaker, prosperity basically comes from a certain extent of diligence. So there might be factors of luck, there might be factors that are uncontrolled by individual, but we think that basically in the long term analysis, prosperity of individual comes from the certain extent of diligence of individual. So the endeavor of that individual possibly working hard to like build up their skills, or like possibly analyzing the market in order to earn money if they are running their own business. So these kinds of things means that to a certain extent, to a large extent, individual success comes from the individual factors of law. So basically, Madam Speaker, if that is true, we think that prosperity theology works in a positive way. Because first of all, Madam Speaker, we think that this ambiguous goal of religious belief is substituted into this tangible and visible standard that we are talking about in today's debate, which is called the wealth. So there is this material wealth, but basically this material wealth is the major subject that the prosperity theology is talking about today. So basically this in a world, basically in a comparative world without this prosperity theology, what happens is people have this ambiguous standard, ambiguous goal of religious belief, or like maybe they tell you that God told you to live some sort of way of life, but then individuals don't really have a particular standard to follow to. So basically meaning that individuals cannot really abide by what the religion is actually telling you. So basically with this prosperity theology, Madam Speaker, what happens is people can now have a visible and tangible standard, which is called the wealth or prosperity of individuals. And that means that individuals who work hard and live diligent life in order to achieve this visible and tangible goal that we are talking about in today's debate. Yes, I would see POI from closing comments.
What is the value of religion?
Well, I don't know if that's actually relevant to my speech, basically, so I'll just move on to the second level. So second level of analysis about the first argument is a comparative that we'd like to give you. So basically, in a comparative that we're talking about today, is that a world without this kind of prosperity theology, what happens is people are simply dependent on God. For example, as I told you before, people are depending on ambiguous goals, like for example, praying to the God. If you have a goal, like if you have something that you want to achieve, you just simply pray to the God, because they believe that God is going to make you successful, or like everything is dependent on the God's will. But we don't think that is basically happening in the reality where prosperity theology is prevalent, because they now have a visible goal, and now they know that they need to stack up money, and they need to work hard in order to do that. Work hard in order to achieve that visible goal that we are talking about in today's debate. So basically, because people have a standard, a real life standard, a real life visible criteria that they can follow on, we think that in and of itself is a positive thing. The third, Madam Speaker, we think that this is also good because basically the followers a specific reality as a labor, or the follower's specific occupation is basically tied more to the religious belief in the first place, due to this idea or doctrine of prosperity gospel. Because basically it's something that is good for the religion. So this is something that is good for the religion because the followers have more incentive to live the reality life more like diligently, and at the same time stay close to the religious beliefs, or stay close to the religious idea that the church teaches them. So basically that is exactly the reason why it has positive impacts, true positive impacts in the reality. So moving on to the second argument about how it cancels off the negative impacts of the capitalism. So in that capitalism is have a higher tendency of becoming exploitative, Madam Speaker, and it's due to the structural factors. Because to some extent it might be a zero-sum game. Some extent there might be competition in the reality, and so maybe like due to some of these structural factors, the wealthy people might be stacking up money by taking away money from the poor people. So this kind of exploitative aspects are actually cancelled off by this prosperity gospel. Because, Madam Speaker, meaning that people have now wealthy people, even they achieve after they achieve prosperity, they have more incentive to donate to people. They have more incentive to support people who are poor. I think that these kinds of incentive, these kinds of motivation comes from this prosperity gospel that we are talking about today. And this is exactly something that cancels off the exploitative aspects of capitalism. And that is exactly the reason why doing that, it also has a positive impact on the reality. So we told you two things, Madam Speaker, in this speech. First of all, I told you why there are positive impacts on the reality. Second of all, I told you how it basically cancels out the possible negative impacts of capitalism. So for all these reasons, I'm more than proud to close.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 10 seconds. Thank you for your speech. Now I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear.
Am I audible? I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think for the most part, opening has a very rational take about how humans work and how religions work in today's society, right? They tell you very rational things such as prosperity. It comes from diligence, it comes from luck, it comes from individual factors, and they tell you that's a very randomized process. And they tell you that basically, if you believe in this prosperity theory, it also happens to do so that it will make you work more diligently, it will give you more luck, individual factors, etc. They tell you that's a randomized factor, and the religious only allows you to accept it. And then they tell you about capitalism, right? How it's a zero-sum game, and basically this gospel itself allows you to donate to poor, giving off, canceling all the negative effects of capitalism itself. The problem with this narrative is that basically what they're not taking into account is that people do not think always rationally. And the problem with this notion, or this fact that people are not always rational thinkers, is that religious itself compounds this problem to a certain extent. And when religion brings in this prosperity gospel, what happens is that it basically turns people who will not always act rationally, and it basically indoctrinates into this equation that donations of financial religious causes, etc., will allow you to prosper better, will allow you to actually become a better person. We think this is very problematic. But before I begin, I'd like to paint a bigger picture of what I just said. Basically, how does religion work? How does Christianity, or this Protestant Christianity, work in Korea? You go to churches, right, which differ, as we told you from our first speaker, which differ greatly by church to church. There is no standardized work, or there is no standardized, systematic structure on how churches should operate. But one common theme is that basically you donate to the church every Sunday, or that is how the church runs by. And basically, we say that when people actually seek out these churches, or when people seek out religion, they tend to have multiple factors. They tend to have multiple, they tend to have multiple things in common with people who actually seek out religion. Maybe that they are in need of help, or maybe that they're looking for religion as a safe space, or maybe that they want to seek the religion as a way to guide their life. Why is this so problematic then? Because people seek religion as a way to guide their life, or as a safe space, or as something that they want to achieve, what happens is that they have a trust in such religion factors, especially in churches. They tend to trust churches beyond what is rational, beyond, even if it's the first time they're going to church, because that is an aspect of religion, right? You have to have complete trust. And that is something that churches will constantly tell you. You have to trust in God. You have to trust in Jesus, even if it might not, visible to your eye, or even if it might not be scientifically correct in certain cases, that you have to have absolute trust. And this is something that is being told you from the start, from the get-go, from these religious entities. And why that's problematic is because when they tell you certain facts, such as that financial donations may allow you to prosper, despite the fact that opening opposition also acknowledged that prosperity is completely random. When they tell you these facts, people take that at face value. They don't start to question these things, or they don't start to question these gospels, because they are at a point where they have complete trust of these entities, and they are at a point where when you start to gain trust with these entities, then you believe in the gospel without actually, thinking twice about it. And that becomes compounded with the problem that these prosperity gospel tells you multiple things, right? You can actually prosper when you actually give financial donations. And opening opposition told you that this is actually good because it cancels out capitalism, right? No matter what you did, no matter how you earned your money, donating makes it better, right? Problem is that these donations don't actually go to the poor. What happens in reality is that when you donate to these churches, the churches themselves run the money itself. The churches themselves keep the money. And since there is a religious tax exemption, we don't know where this money is going from. There is complete lack of transparency on this part. And most churches don't actually reveal where their money has been spent. It might have gone to the pastor, it might have gone to buy more buildings. We don't know, because that is something that they do not reveal, and that is something they're shielded by. They don't have to reveal to their followers, or they don't have to reveal to people who believe in the church, because that is not something the Bible tells them to do. So this complete lack of transparency, this complete lack of how this operation runs, and the fact that there's constant belief, or there is a constant, a factor of belief that is compounded within these people of religion and between what the church tells them to do, creates this huge problem where basically people donate money to a cause where they actually don't know where it goes. Before I begin any further, I'll take you on.
All right. I think info slide says that the way in which you get that material gaining isn't through only donation, but moral acts in general. Why is it that the case that people only donate?
Okay, so we believe that this is because churches have a financial incentive to basically make sure that you donate more. When you go to a church, as we told you from our first speaker, we believe that there are two factors in today's debate in terms of believers. There's also people who go constantly to churches. There's also people who may not be as so into churches or are starting to get into churches. The problem is that we believe that this narrative or this gospel that has been dominated in Korean Protestant churches has created financial incentive for churches to make sure that instead of, for example, volunteering or acting in moral acts try to help out the poor, they make it easy to basically donate, right? The donation, as we told you, is a more accessible way in our modern society. It's not easy to go and volunteer 8 hours or 10 hours. Sure, there might be some volunteering, but by churches mostly, they make it so that a donation is the same equivalent as volunteering. They also created this equation where basically donating allows you to gain this moral justification that it's the same thing as volunteering and that you acted in a moral way. Also, going to the second part of why churches have financial incentive, because they earn more money. Because once you donate, the church earns the money, they keep that money that is tax exempt. Basically, we believe that this creates a situation where basically churches are financially incentivized to tell their followers to donate more, or if you can't volunteer, it's okay, just donate and we'll make that same thing. So we believe that is why churches themselves also have a financial incentive to make sure. Going to the second part about why this is problematic in my extension or in my new argument, we believe that most Protestant churches work under one common factor. It is that in order to actually be rescued from God, you have to spread the gospel, right? You have to spread the gospel of God. You have to make sure that more people come to your church, more people believe in the work of God, and more people actually believe in the sayings of Jesus, etc. So what this means is that basically you recruit more people to come into your church. We believe that this only compounds the problem furthermore. Why? It creates this vicious cycle where churches basically will seek out people, and we say that for the most part, the people they seek out are going to probably be the people who are seeking out for religion, right? And we believe that once they actually get these people in, they tend to actually spread this gospel of coupling these financial incentives, etc., and this financial as we told you before, and making sure that people donate much more once they get into the church. We think that's problematic. So as we told you today from the multiple parts, from our multiple analysis, religion itself is already causes people to believe in certain things. And we believe that these Korean Protestant churches, they also have a financial incentive to make sure that people donate. And that is why we fully regret this doctrine, or we fully regret this gospel that is dominating Korean society, where we have to donate, and this gives you moral justification. And this also gives financial incentive to the church. And that is why we deteriorate religion to the point of no going beyond. And that's why we're fully proud to close.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 17 seconds. Thank you for your speech. Now I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Madam Speaker, we think the biggest mistake that has come from opening government is that this side thinks that this specific prosperity theology is the reason to why people cause immoral actions. We think this is not true. We think that the actual reason for why people cause immoral actions and exploit others is because of the religious authorities and the churches or the other entities that even their side have conceded. So why is this? We think number one, it's clearly different with the actions that are actually happening, the coercive atmosphere that has been created by the authorities of the religion versus this prosperity theory. We think that right now what authorities are basically doing in churches is that, yes, I do realize that these people condemn people for opting out of their own churches, condemn people for specifically not following the certain line of directions. But we think that this is clearly different with this prosperity theory for theology for three reasons. Number one, we think that this prosperity theology doesn't point out for you to do specific actions. Rather, we think that as it is clearly stated in the info slide, it actually inclines you to do some wide range actions. For example, you need to enhance your own lifestyle, enhance your own health. If you're in a good physical state, that means that you're going closer and you're actually fulfilling God's expectations. So we think that unlike what their side is trying to say, that this prosperity theology is clearly coercing you to do specific line of actions, we don't think this is true to begin with. On the other hand, on comparative, we think what the authorities are doing is pretty specific. Whereas, for example, pointing out to you to donate a certain amount of money, donate this amount of money in a specific time period, we don't think this is the same to begin with. But number two, we don't think that this prosperity theology is directly correlated to religion to begin with. Why? Because even if you're not like directly opted into a certain religion, even if you're not believing like a Protestant theology, Protestant Catholic church, we think that this prosperity theology still can exist inside your head if you deep-heartedly believe that whatever you do, whatever good things that you do and contribute in society, you can actually go closer to God. We don't think that we think that you can still believe in this theology, which means that even if you don't follow the wide range actions that I've clearly told you in these things, we don't think that there's going to be any condemnation from the existing church, which is clearly different with the authorities, the sort of coercive atmosphere to begin with. The third reason why it's different is because number one, we think that as the POI have briefly stated, we think that currently on a comparative under their side, we think what points out to be a good action is basically to donate on the specific like institution or specific church that you're actually in, actually belong to. But on the other hand, we think that this theory doesn't point out that you only have to donate to your own church or only have to donate to that specific institution. We think what this theology specifically states is that you have to enhance your quality of life and help others, support others, and even if you're accumulating wealth, if you in the process of doing so, if you support others and if you don't exploit other laborers and whatnot, you're still going to fulfill the line of expectations of God. So we think that for these three reasons, we think that we have absolutely thrashed the whole logic that have come from opening government, because what their side of is saying that this is causing that this theology is causing immoral actions, but we think that this should rather attribute to the religious authorities that are currently existing in the status quo. But furthermore, when their side of told us that whatever Bible is saying we cannot abide because it's arbitrary, therefore their interpretations, we have two responses. Number one, we think that this is absolutely irrelevant to begin with, because yes, of course, Bible interpretation is different, but we think that this is a theology where it points out. And number two, we think this is, even if it is relevant, we don't think it's true to begin with, because Bible is not something, I don't think that their side knows what a Bible is. Bible is not something like, it's not a rule book where it tells you to do this or do that. It's basically a history book telling you what Jesus actually did during his time at Jerusalem, how Jesus actually helped it, how Jesus gave bread and food and necessary things for life to other people during his lifetime, right? Which means that this doesn't absolutely incline you to do things like kill others or whatnot. Even if there are room for interpretation, we don't think that if you're by demonizing, like by simply saying that the Bible, if there's room for interpretation, doesn't necessarily mean that it's suddenly going to lead to people causing immoral actions to begin with. So we think this is absolute problem solution mismatch, and there, because I've absolutely thrashed their case, we're going to move on to some other things that their side have told us before. Okay, so what else? Their side then tells us that Bible justifies immoral action. Now, other than the previous responses that I've already told you that this doesn't have to do with Bible, doesn't have to do with this prosperity theology, but rather has to do with the coercive authorities that have already told you. I think that this is not true to begin with. But even if it is true, Madam Speaker, even if it is true, Madam Speaker, we think that this is much better than yours, much better than government side. Why? Because because in the status quo, what's actually happening is that these people are demonizing the rich people, because what's actually happening is the rich people oftentimes in the process of accumulating wealth, in the process of accumulating money, they actually exploit other laborers. They try to take away money from others, and that sort of stereotypical image is still there on the rich people. Versus on a comparative on our side, it's much better, because the notion that states here is that you need to find the optimum of balance between accumulating wealth and helping other people, which means that under their side, there's still people who are exploiting others, still people who are accumulating wealth without any sort of balance that could mitigate these sort of situations. But on our side, because it clearly states in this prosperity theology that it's good that you're accumulating wealth, but at the same time, you need to help others, you need to donate money to others, you need to help the poor. We think there's optimal balance that these people are actually inclined to follow, which means that we absolutely don't regret that this specific theology is being spread out, because it's actually there's no sort of structural method to mitigate these sort of exploitation that's already going on. So we think that even if it is true that immoral action is happening, it's much worse on their side, Madam Speaker. But furthermore, their side said that this actually this sort of theology denounces the people who are poor. 4 responses. Number one, we think this is not true. We think it actually gives hope to poor people, that even if I am at the very moment poor, if I try to enhance my lifestyle, I can be better at next time. We think that there's absolutely no sort of alternative that's better than this. But number two, we don't think this is a dichotomy of wealth and poor, Madam Speaker. We think that they absolutely misunderstood what's this motion. So okay, I'll set your PY.
Closing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the process of trying to mitigate OG's arguments and saying that this is not coercion, you also bite back all the benefits you get, because it really takes a lot of conviction and belief for people to work harder, right?
Yeah, sure, yeah. I'm going to give you that comparative later on. But yeah, furthermore, yeah, it takes a lot of, but we don't think it's a dichotomy of rich or poor to begin with, because it's much more complex what this theory says, like I told you before. But number three, on a comparative, yeah, this is a response to your POI, but under their side, yes, you have a religion, you're psychologically stable because people instinctively want to rely on something when they're on a poor situation, but there's nothing that's going to change because the essence is that there's nothing going to change in their quality of life to begin with, because they're only going to resort and only going to rely on the current religion that they're in. But on a comparative, we think that on our side it's much good, because you have something to rely on, which means that the benefit that is derived from their side is still there. You have a belief that if you do something good, if you accumulate wealth, if you try hard to do something, you're going closer to God, plus which means that this actually inclines to the actual actions that could actually contribute to enhancing your quality of life to begin with. But number four, we think that this is wrong, because there's going to be collective support that leads to good circulation. Why? Because we've already told you that this theology is the one that inclines you to do good actions, to donate to poor people, and which means that this is going to provide collective good actions, circulations that can actually lead to actually better lives for poor people. So when they say that we're denouncing poor people's lives, we think that it's absolutely wrong, and therefore we're more than proud to take this debate home. Thank you.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you for your speech. Now to open up the closing half, government member. Here.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Yes, okay, great. I'll begin my speech I'll take POIs by chat. If I don't take any POIs by chat, of course you'll POI. So if it's around 5:30, it'll be appreciated if you guys could tell me, and I'll take as many POIs as I can. I have no preferred pronouns, and I'll begin my speech. Now, panel, we want to live in a world where the sanctity of religion and the happiness derived thereof is maximized, and the religious institutions are brought under justice and have checks. While the opening government gave you a wishy-washy and kind of a Protestant, kind of a Catholic context, we will give you a correct South Korean context closing from the closing government. Religious institutions in South Korea have ultimate power over the lives of citizens already. They do not pay taxes. They're not legally responsible under any law. They have the support of the nation's most powerful men and have limited check and balances but ultimate power over the South Korean population. And we also give you a better characterization of the people who go into prosperity religion. The difference between prosperity religion and other types of religion is that compared to, for example, religion emphasizing going to heaven or religious emphasizing doing good to others, prosperity religion is emphasizing wealth as a very core of Christianity. People only whose main focus is to maximize wealth, who need money, or the poor and the needy who have a skewed societal bias against earning money go into prosperity religion. And we'll give you much more details as to why that's bad. Our first factual coming exclusively from the closing government. It empowers corrupt religions and organizations. While the opening government gave you a stance saying that, religious institutions are corrupt, they do bad things. But we'll give you a much more clear characterization of why this is how. It is important to think of how is the prosperity gospel in South Korea decided. God is invisible. Now, the opening government told you and said that, there are different sects, but we believe that there are also these mega churches who have the most impact on people, where one person decides everything that God tells you, and God tells you which is right, wrong. Holy men in this context of South Korean Christianity are pastors who decide what God says. And if you link all wealth to religion, it means that the pastor's words are directly linked to wealth. You need to pay the church to become rich. You need to send your children to church schools to become rich, which means that church has ultimate power over wealth. And to these people who money is so important to, as you characterize correctly, it brings so many harms in this process. There are no check and balances to example, sexual abuses by church, because the word of God is the word of the pastor, and the word of the pastor gives you money, which you need so desperately. So you believe that sexual abuses are okay. But it also leads to more blackmailing of these poor people. Opening government said that there are these religions who have no moral standards. But the opening opposition told you that the Bible is not like a rule book. However, we give you a much more clear characterization. While the New Testament of the Christians is about the life of God, the Old Testament of Christianity is a rule book. If you've ever heard of the 10 Commandments, those are 10 commandments, not 10 stories of the Jesus life. Do not lie or cut your tongue off. Do not look at women with lust or kill yourself, right? It is not only moral, but monetary. Because of these high standards that the church puts on people, they pay things like tithes to church, where the amount of sin they do, they translate to money, giving it to the church, which means that at the end of the day, these churches amass more and more amounts of money under the prosperity gospel. Even if you become rich under 1% of the schemes that the church does, you have to pay the church back again, which leads to a vicious cycle of continuously paying the church rather than focusing on your own lives. And the harm we'll explain later. But second, it limits the long-term happiness derived by religion. What is the role of religion is the more clear characteristic we want to give to you today. Everything else that religion provides can be provided by every other monetary or financial or human entities in the current world. What is exclusive of our religion is happiness and the comfort and hopes that come out. I'll be giving you a historical context. The beginning of religion was all begun by unrecognizable phenomena such as lightning floods that people could not understand, because they attributed to an entity such as God, who cannot be wrong and who can do everything and who knows everything. People got comfort and gave meaning to their lives. And this is in the Korean, but also modern context. Now, if most people going into prosperity religion will not become rich, is something that both sides of the opening agreed upon, that 80 or 90% will still remain poor. It links God to a tangible thing, which means that unlike storms, actual money in front of you, it makes religion valuable. It loses faith of many people in society, meaning that they will not get the long-term other benefits, not only monetary, but mental or physical comfort that can come from religion. And we believe that this is an exclusive harm, and that is our regret. The third point is, why is giving money to churches wrong? The OG said that they're corrupt, but I think this is a very shallow and a very limited case. Even if you take the best of the opposition and say that there are some churches who do good, like the closing opposition will say, that there are some churches who want you to do good things, people who subscribe to prosperity religion are poor. They cannot rely on reality to earn money, and that's why they go into prosperity religion, right? However, we say that they need a much more, because they cannot earn money due to societal skewness, they need to use their money on themselves. They need to make investments on education. They need to make investments on land. But this cannot happen in the prosperity religion, because all your money needs to go into a church. And that is why you'll become rich, which 80 or 90% of them will never do. We believe that this oppresses minorities at the end of the day. Finally, we also say that there are more religious dissent on the side of the opposition. But before that, I'll take a POI.
Yeah, so I think that like Golf Bench main case is that religion has skewed moral standard. But why is that exclusive on opposition when that structure itself stays the same anyways?
Thank you. We believe that the religious is skewed either ways. However, if you link it to monetary incentives, there's much more power for religion to have control of your life, A. But second, it also decreases the amount of happiness because even if it's skewed, you can still say, even if I don't get money from God, I can get other things, other benefits, such as moral harm, such as moral comfort or other mental things. However, if you only link it to money and if it's tangible, it decreases the amount of happiness and decreases the amount of comfort you can get. Final point, it causes much more religious dissent. We'll give you a clear characterization of what religion is. It is also giving to the poor. However, there are also bad things. The core of Protestant religion is to bring everybody under God's rule, to bring everybody into Christianity, which means that in the long term, if you want to get rich in this type of scenario, you need to ostracize Muslims or bring them into Christianity in order to become rich. You need to haggle non-believers much more because money is so important to you and you need to get rich. And the only reason you'll get rich is to believe in the core Christian religion, which is bringing much more people into Christianity is better, which means that it oppresses minorities. It oppresses gay people, which the Bible clearly states should be stoned to death. You take a literal interpretation because money is so important to you, and you begin to haggle the poor and say that the only reason they're poor is because they do not have faith. Rather than look at societal impacts and societal reasons why they're poor, you just say that because you do not believe in God, you're poor, and I have nothing else to do with it, which means that at the end of the day, people won't care about the poor people anymore. They actually not really believe in helping out the poor, which is the opposition said. And that is our very proud to propose. Thank you.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you for your speech. Not to welcome the opposition member. Hear, hear.
Hi, just a second. Yeah, so assuming that I am audible at this point. POI is in the chat, please. I think that the biggest problem of government side is that they do not understand what this theology really looks like, right? Because firstly, it says that you can get money if you are moral, as info slide says. It's not to suggest that earning money itself is moral, but it says that as a result of your moral action, you receive like monetary compensation as on a word, right? So Goff cannot just say that people do immoral acts to earn money and justify that, right? Insofar as moral framework exists, this is a reward that we are providing for these individuals, and that's a notch that makes individuals abide by morality. I think Goff really doesn't understand what this theology looks like, right? But secondly, I think that when like the Goff case also relies on the idea that these rich people or like religious authorities get to like scapegoat their immoral action, but they have more like capital to do their immoral action because like there's more donation coming to church, right? This is quite false. Why? Because I think that this theology isn't just applied to like ordinary believers, but this is also applied to religious authorities as well, right? So I'd say that if it is true that like religion works based on the hierarchical structure of God existing, this means that these religious authorities also are able to internalize the idea that if I do immoral act, that God is going to punish me. That punishment is going to take a form of me losing my capital, me losing my money, and therefore we don't think that God can say that people are able to justify themselves insofar as these people are religious as well. I'd say that these individuals also have the incentive to be moral at the end of the day, right? The first thing that I want to do in my speech is to question of what is the religious moral value. Because I think that Goff case is quite consistent in saying that religion is arbitrary, individuals interpret like moral fabric on their own, and I think opening opposition does a very bad job in responding to this, right? Firstly, I think that CG does agree that religious moral fabric is not really arbitrary when they say things like 10 commandments exist and give like empirical evidences of like specific moral guideline that religion provides, right? But secondly, I'd suggest that we don't think that Christianity in South Korea is necessarily decentralized as OG puts, because you see institutions like Hangichong, which are accountable entity that controls the Protestant domain in status quo to the extent to which we do not think that like it's really decentralized as OG puts. Thirdly, I think that even if we do agree that maybe central authority or central institutions isn't as powerful, I suggest that discussions already occur. What does this mean? Things like Christian forums, right? Things like debates and whatnot. I think that there's already a vibrant discourse happening, which is able to rule out skewed moral fabric, and which is also able to deal with the idea of people have irrational belief that OG says, right? And the structural reasons as to why these discussions happen is because religion has an incentive to provide guideline, not only in terms of the monetary gaining that individuals have, but in terms of the overall lifestyle, right? Which is also why it's untrue when OG says that people donate and feel like they're already moral and therefore justify their immoral actions in other aspects of their life, right? We think that religion says that you should be moral persistently in your life, right? That's the obvious basic that religion says. It's not that religion says that because you have donated some money to like religious institutions, you can commit theft, but you'll still go to heaven. I just don't really think that that is the case. So therefore, I think that people have the incentive to abide by moral values throughout their daily lives provided by religious institutions, right? But government side says that moral standard is skewed, and like CG comes up with this ludicrous idea of sexual abuse gets justified. I don't really think that that is the case. Insofar as discussions happen, we can rule out these things. But if it is the case that moral standard is skewed, I'd say that that is quite symmetric on both worlds anyways, right? I really want to talk about why we think that redistribution happens, or why, given that this is a retrospective motion, why it was beneficial in the case of Korea. I think that if you look at Korea and like Korean history, the economic prosperity has been such an important issue and agenda after Korean War, where we're economically deprived, right? That's why economic prosperity was something that A, individuals cared a lot, but B, became a national agenda, which is the background of this theology and why Christianity adopted this narrative in order to appeal to broad-based public. What does this mean? This means that people would want to be rich on either side anyways, right? But the question is, with the way in which they try to accumulate their wealth is oftentimes going to be aligned with immoral action, right? Especially in the past when Korea was politically unstable, where corruption was quite like vivid in South Korea. I'd say that the way in which people accrue material gaining is through opting into things like patronage system, directly like stealing from other individuals, right? I think that the path to economic prosperity was through immoral act, and I think that this framework is what allows individuals to pursue that economic prosperity or economic gaining through things that are not immoral, because A, this narrative says that you cannot be rich if you are immoral, but B, it says that even if you're rich, you will lose your money as a result and as a punishment if you're not moral, right? So I think that this is the nudge that we're able to give that to make individuals abide by the morality, which is why overall transparency increases, and this is the impact that CO brings to this debate, right? Before moving on to the redistribution part, I'll take POI from CG.
Yeah, if you agree that, let's say, 10 Commandments are up to the interpretation of each pastor, what's saying that there are immoral standards for you to exactly follow while accumulating wealth, which is good for society?
First of all, I'd say that I don't really think that majority of the religious doctrines or moral fabric is as immoral as you want to say, because of the discourse and the way in which we can rule out these things, as I've told you. But secondly, I think that religion, regardless of this economic incentive, always pushes their believers to abide by their beliefs if you want to go to heaven, right? I think that therefore, if it is the case that religion has an immoral fabric, I think that that also exists on your side anyways, but I'm going to I think I already dealt with that already. So why do we think that redistribution in the present also is impactful? Because I think opening opposition tells you that this is able to rule out bad aspects of capitalism because people donate, but they don't describe what the counterfactual looks like on government side, right? Because Christian institutions in status quo of South Korea is already rich and politically powerful, right? And the motion is not about regretting religion itself, which means that rich, powerful institutions would exist in either world, right? But what exactly is the counterfactual world, right? I think that the point in which this theology or religious narrative do not touch upon the material calculations of these institutions. All that these religious institutions have to do is things like opting into lobbying political party to entrench their power asymmetry. I think that on our side, what we do is that if you want to gain more money, if you want to be more powerful, then you should give your wealth and you should distribute your wealth and capital to people who don't have that, right? I think that the reason why this is important is because South Korea has such a huge stratification entrenched by things like past elite politics, unstable governance, and therefore the urgency of problem exists, which only is solvable in closing opposition's fabric. Thanks.
I think you have to.
Speaker,
Yeah.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes, 11 seconds. Thank you for your speech. And I'd like to welcome the government whip. Hear, hear.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I have to waste your time, but my internet connection seems really bad, so my screen is stopped. So I'm just gonna talk for like 20 seconds right now so that I'm sure my voice isn't cracking. It isn't cracking, right? Hopefully. Or does it crack?
You're
My screen
fine.
is
It's not cracking. You're fine.
Okay. Okay, so I'll take POIs by chat and I'll take a sip of water and I'll start. Speech starts in 3, 2, 1. We hope to live in a world where religion is solely about the spiritual salvation that you can get individual and independent of the material world, because we think that is the most integrate and also the most practical way. 3 things in my speech. First, I'm going to deal with corruption and why the failure of the opposition's side to assume that corruption is not likely to happen is crucially one of their unrealistic and harms. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the non-material value of religion, which the opposition conveniently tries not to engage. And last of all, I'll try to fight them on their grounds on how this is going to lead to practical change, why people act more immorally, or the entire trickle-down effect is not going to happen on the opposition side. Corruption. Seoul says if that people are like religion is skewed on both sides, then it's like a symmetry matter. Sure, but that does ignore most of the part that the member said. But crucially, I think it's not only about the entire fact that religious bodies are often corrupt. I think it's also about the impacts, because in their world, if your material success is based on your church because the prayers of the pastors, because of your donations, then they will pressure individuals to pay back to the church. Meaning, even if the intentions and the maliciousness and the corruption on the sides are both symmetrical, the magnitude and the impact of the money that they will be able to use in corruption is going to significantly increase on their side because of this pressure. But last of all, I also think that their realistic characterization is not right. Just because Hanggichong or all these Korean organizations don't have all these like fraudulent ideas on the media does not mean that there is inner corruption going on. So we might have not seen like frauds or like economic fraud, like corruption like on the news for the last few years, but there have been constantly a lot of feuds about certain political figures or or pastors using human resources or making like very connections that are like non-constitutional within their things. So I think there's a lot going on here. We simply don't trust them like to the full extent, at the same extent at public or political offices. Second of all, what CG uniquely brings to you is, unlike opening government in which they do not characterize or why like accessibility is an issue, we tell you that we already characterize that the people who subscribe to these religions are more likely to be people who are unable to access the material wealth on like normal basis of like how people usually do it in like rich means. So that's an important thing, because without that, we can't really assess how much of the people are not going to find it accessible for this material wealth that this religion is able to give. Now, here's the problem. OG explains that so I think what O totally negates and totally denies in engaging is the fact it's not just the fact, it's not like a time frame, right? Religions give you hope and people get hope. It's not that. It's a continuous cycle, and people believe, people make prayers to God that I want to get more money, I want to get a new job, I want to go get like win the lottery, but it doesn't happen, and then they feel that God has abandoned me. OG says that only happens on the opposition side, which is simply not true. We're going to take the fullest bullet. We think that it also happens on our side, in which people think they want to win, like they want to go to a good school, they also make wishes. So in a sense, it might seem like symmetrically happening. But the reason why we are able to explain that these are very different are because of 3 reasons. First of all, I think the entire factor that you decide these things on prayers, on material wealth, is significantly different in regards to ambiguity, because you have clear goals. You want the money that you want to have, you want the lottery that you want to win in a basis. Compared to ours, our wishes are more ambiguous. Even though they aren't exactly fulfilled, people feel that maybe God will give them the chance next time. Second of all, I think material wishes are most like inside a time frame in which you want to get this amount of money, you want to get like this amount of statistics or profits within your corporations, which are very, very clear, in which if you fail to achieve this, then this amount of abandonment that you get from God is like entirely like entirely bigger. But last of all, I think the entire nuance that Shun gave, in which the reason why these religions are significantly different is people have, when they enter the religion, they have this expectation of gaining material wealth that is going to lead to higher expectations when they wish for God, is the exact sense why in their world they're actually going to experience more failure or more abandon from God, which means for the people who actually can't get material wealth, for the people who actually cannot get rich, which is the actual people that we want to center this debate upon, because those are like 90% of the people who are actually going to get all the religious benefits and also are going to be desperate of beliefs. Then in our world, in their world, they're going to fail. They're going to not believe in God. They're going to think that God isn't as omnipotent and powerful as they think, in which all of the values that we actually think important of the independent material wealth does not happen and is not substantiated. That's the biggest impact that we are able to prove in this speech. But last of all, why do we think that all their practical benefits fall? I'm going to engage in O and C entirely. So I don't simply understand So they try to mitigate the harms of opening government by saying that, it's not coercive. But one rebuttal to this, in the reality, look at the church structure. You go to sermons, you have to listen to them for 1 hour. You're pretty much indoctrinated of the fact that whatever they say, and it's going to be about the importance of material wealth on their side. It's going to be about how, whatever it is, you have to work hard, you have to pay donations, and it's going to get into your brains. But it's also going to be about the fact that there is a time where everyone goes out to pay donations. So it has to be coercive to a certain extent. But yeah, so, and like doctrines, if doctrines are not a thing, why are there people who don't drink because of religious reasons? But the reason, so even though that's not realistic, but the point is, like, it washes out basically all the arguments that the leader of opposition talks about. I think it's largely unstrategic. The way I engaged to Seoul on this point in regards to like the differences, so this example, in our world, if you have 10 hours and you would use 5 hours in religion, and you would use 5 hours to like cultivate or like go to work because of economic reasons, because we understand Seoul tells us everyone wants money in both worlds. That's going to happen in our world. In their world, because you think that religion is a means to getting that money, you're going to use 5 hours in religion, just like we do. You're going to use 3 additional hours to pray more, because that's a mean and tool in getting money. And then you're going to use 2 hours to self-cultivate and become like do economic activities, in which no PYs, right?
You're a PY.
PYO. Okay.
So so both sides, we agree, we concede to the fact that there's an authoritative atmosphere in church, whether it be your side or our side. Can you respond to my rebuttal when I said that this theology is the least authoritative doctrine that's existing in the status quo?
No, there was absolutely no reason why this is least authoritative. But again, if it's least authoritative, then there's least benefit on your side as well. And I have much more rebuttals to give. So that's the reason why I also engaged the CEO, in which people achieving the actual solvency to become material, like wealthy or well off, is going to significantly decrease. But last of all, why the entire trickle down effect of people being moral diseases? First of all, it's important that you know, especially when it comes to the argument that people are going to donate to people outside the church. That doesn't happen, because people not think the reason why people are poor is not because it's because they don't believe in God. Because God gives you money if you believe in him. Unlike in our world, we don't really think that material wealth is really part of that entire syndrome. So what we're able to prove in the end, and at the end of the day, is that we're able to prove the actual essence of religion, in which it shouldn't be tied, or people shouldn't be entering into the church because they want money. And we also think that the second most important thing is that people should be able to get happiness and salvation, that there is going to be a brighter future, despite the fact that God hasn't listened to your prayers, that you win the lottery, and everything that God gives you should be centered about like money. That is why we think that religion must be for everyone. Very proud to propose.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 22 seconds. Thank you for your speech. I'd like to welcome the final speaker of the round, the opposition whip. Hear, hear.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, starting in a moment.
Speaker, please begin.
I think, yeah, oh, I was just, I think the point at which CG is out of this debate is when they refuse to take any kind of trade-off in terms of accepting our benefits, which is giving historical reasons for why redistribution, which stems largely from this type of belief, has been super important, especially in South Korea. And the only thing they say is that, oh, people spending a lot of time on praying and people like feeling like God abandoned them is really bad. I feel like this is just super like out of context and like not grounded into any kind of realistic impact of like, is this really that bad? Is this really especially bad compared to the stuff that we talked about and the importance of like having redistribution? I think the point at which we beat CG is where we say that we're okay with the trade-off. We're okay with, even if people like feel bad, even if they feel that God abandoned them, as long as it means that people are more likely to redistribute, as long as it means people are more likely to give money to churches who often, as we already mentioned, use the money to do good things because religious values, whether you like it or not, generally say like pretty good things like, hey, help your neighbor, like, help those who in need, like do what Jesus would do, like give food, like, like what is it, like through kitchens, or like give housing or education to those who need it. As long as money keeps being funneled into these types of good deeds, which I think they haven't proven that aren't mostly good deeds, I think that we're okay with the trade-off of saying, even if people get somewhat dejected and feel like, oh, maybe God doesn't like me, as long as these tangible benefits continue to accrue, we don't really see what the big deal or the big harm on their side is. But let me pass that trade-off. Let me get on to the more nitty-gritty like rebuttals of this. So will people feel like super dejected because they have like this like very materialistic view of like what it means to be like religious? I don't think this is necessarily the case. So they say that like you can like, because this is such an unambiguous goal of like, I want to donate or do good things and they get money, it means that you will more easily be rejected. But I don't think this is the case, because it's not as if they say like, hey, if you donate exactly 1999, you will get like this much money back in like 10 years. I don't think this is how this religion works. And therefore, I don't see how this mechanism of like, because it's more tangible, therefore you'll be more easily rejected works. I think a more likely version is that you maybe do some good things. You maybe donate some money to your like, I don't know, religious organizations. You try to help your like people around you in your neighborhood or whatnot. And then if you don't, for example, get money, you're more likely to think like, oh, maybe I didn't do enough. Maybe I need to keep working hard. Maybe I must do a bit more. Maybe I must do a little bit more good deeds in order to get that like good karma like back to me later on. I don't really see any proof as to why the automatic reaction of people will be, oh, I gave this much money, therefore I should have received exactly this amount because I didn't, therefore I feel horrible, therefore God sucks. I don't think this has been proven in any way. And I don't think it's therefore it's fair for them to say that people are more easily dejected under our side. And as I already proved in my trade-off, even if they were, we think that's a fine trade-off for us to take. With that being said, we move on to more responses towards CG. So then they give this like speech of like, oh, but religion should be immaterial because immaterial is what matters. But like, of course, we also have like immaterial things in our like faith. It's not as if church under our role is only about money. Like you go to church and there's like a person standing there like, hey, give me $50, and you're like, okay, here you go, and then you leave. No, of course, churches still revolve around the same core activities, no matter what. Core activities of like, going on Sundays, meeting with people of your community, like listening to these like, what do you call, not lecture, but like these sermons or whatever they are, and like partaking in like, gospel and all these kinds of things. I think, of course, these things exist on both sides. And of course, the core message of these things on both sides is going to be like the same things. Like, so on both sides is still Christianity. And therefore, it's still going to be about things like, be nice to other people, like do what Jesus would do. So I don't think it's fair for them to say that in our world, it's only going to be about money. And therefore, you lose all the immaterial aspects of religion. I just think this is like wholly unproven and just a weird way of trying to tackle our case. I think like the point at which our case becomes important in a debate winning case is because A, we prove that, especially in South Korea, because people consider wealth important on both sides, which we prove that by discussing like historical reasons of like historical poverty, especially after the Korean War and like the Asian financial crisis and like the times of like dictatorship where it was super hard to like rise in hierarchy through any kind of meritocratic means, especially because of these reasons that people consider wealth super important, and therefore because they are then very, very likely to want to opt into these kinds of sets of rules where they think that, hey, because I consider wealth really, really important, therefore the best way for me to get it is through like giving money and like doing these nice things. Right. We think the comparative is under gov world, because people obviously still probably are going to be materialistic. It's much more likely for them to want to be okay with, okay, I have money, now I'm going to sit on this money and not do anything. and continue to accumulate my own wealth instead of opting into our system, where they're much more likely to want to do good things with this money. And the second reason why this debate winning is because we gave reasons why this is super, super important, especially in South Korea, because we analyzed the fact that South Korea has been historically, and even today, extremely socially / economically stratified, in the sense that there exists huge gap and inequality between the classes, especially historically, due to, for example, the fact, as I already explained, that meritocracy wasn't really a big deal, and therefore, like, for you to rise in hierarchy was super, super hard, and because like labor rights weren't really a thing during like Park Chung-hee era and whatnot. I think especially because of these reasons, it has been very, very important historically for gaining meritocracy and gaining fair systems of like rising in hierarchy in South Korea through this alleviation of social stratification by the fact that this narrative of like gospel, like prosperity gospel, has been a big deal, which therefore has made it like including rich people to like want to do good things and donate to these like religious organizations that often like do these nice things, like redistribute, help educate, give food and whatnot, which gives people a way to live their lives. Yes, closing.
Thank you. Wouldn't in your case Christians donate less to poor people because the only reason they're poor is because they don't believe in God? Rather, wouldn't they donate to rich other Christians, and this will lead to an increase in the accumulation of wealth by rich Christians, and say that poor people are poor because they do not believe in God and because they're not Christians?
I mean, no, because I think the origin of this donation, probably on both sides, at least we haven't proven that this isn't the case, probably on both sides stems from religious values. And what are religious values? Whether it be Catholicism, whether it be Protestantism, these are still values that say like, hey, helping your neighbors are good, helping those in need are good. The Bible doesn't say like, hey, helping the richest person in your country is like a very nice thing. Like, I don't think this is just like, it's just very unproven premises that you're trying to use to attack our case. I just don't think I'm buying any of them. The reason we take this over our own opening is because our own opening fails to explain any like mechanistic or like any impact as to why is it so important to like counterbalance these like bad things of capitalism. They just say that it's kind of good because capitalism sometimes does bad things. I think we are the one who gave specific reasons regarding to South Korea, regarding the way the South Korean society is structured, why it's especially important here for us to be able to have like people willing to redistribute, because it's been a super key factor in like gaining fair systems and like gaining a more egalitarian society in Korea. And the reason we take over OG is because we think that they simply had a very, very weird case where they thought that like materialism only exists under our side. But I think we already rebutted that in our responses towards CHE. I think we should be the ones to win this debate. Thank you so much.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 19 seconds. Thank you for your speech. With that speech, it concludes this round of debate. Thank you all debaters. Please go back to the main auditorium and wait later to find out the results.
Thanks.